Hey guys, I'm IzDaisho and I am here bringing you some more magic, and this time I'm going to be doing the M13 limited review, doing blue now, obviously. And yeah, let's just get right into it. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, I'm taking M13, the newest set that came out. Next one's coming out in a couple of weeks, but now I'm going to be doing blue. The reason why I'm doing this is just because I feel like people who do these set reviews usually do them towards the beginning of a set coming out, and they don't really know exactly how the format's going to play out. They don't know how worth it cards are. So cards like Archaeomancer, for instance, could have been like, maybe this card isn't that good, but it turns out that it's actually a pretty good card, and it works really well in this format. So I'm going to jump right into it. Okay, so Archaeomancer. I gave Archaeomancer a 7 out of 10. I think this card's really good, and it's one of the cards that you really want to pick up if you've got a couple of divinations or non-summons or essence scatters. Like any of those cards sleep. It works well with all these cards. Obviously, essence scatter's not great with, but still works well. And then probably my favorite thing to use it with is Switcheroo, just because you can just Archaeomancer, Switcheroo, and then switch them Archaeomancer, and then like unsummon that or something. I don't know, something crazy like that. But anyway, Archaeomancer I gave a 7 out of 10. I think he's just a really good card. Arctic Aven. Arctic Aven is really hard to evaluate because if you're not playing white, he's not unplayable, but he's definitely not good. And you probably don't run him in your deck unless your deck is a little weak on playables. So it makes him really only good in that one archetype. And then in that archetype, it seems like he's the best card ever. I mean, a 3/2 lifelink flying for 3 just seems absolutely absurd. But if you notice the format, it's basically dominated by 2-power flyers, or the air is just basically dominated by 2-power flyers. Bloodhunter Bat, whatever this thing is called, Welkin Turn, Windrake, Talons Invocation, like pretty much all the flyers in the format have 2 toughness. And then even the things in green that have reach, the Deadly Recluse and the Sentinel Spider, can still trade with it. So it's really, it generally trades with something, eats a removal spell, or gets 3 lifelink and trades something. So yeah, so it's really, and then obviously the last option is that it can just completely take over a game if they don't have an answer to it. But it's just so rare that happens, that they have no way to deal with it. So yeah, I really just don't like this. Oh yeah, a big card that I completely forgot to talk about that has 2 powers, War Falcon, because that card just completely shuts off Arctic Aven. But anyway, so I gave Arctic Aven a 7 just because it does have that ability to take over the game. They do have to find something to trade with it, but it's really rare that opportunity is going to happen. So it's a good card, and if you're in white, then it obviously goes higher. But taking into account that it trades with everything, and it is only good in one archetype, I gave it only a 7. Augur of Bolas. I mean, this card, it just seems like it has so much potential, but it's never really impressed me too much. I mean, a 1/3 body is definitely relevant in this format. It just walls off all the bears. And then at the 2-drop spot, that's awesome. I've seen Scroll Thieves just make the boards just stall out, and then if you were able to get that out, a 1/3 out 1 turn earlier, then that's fine. I guess it does pretty well against the red decks. It trades with like a Reckless Brute after it already did its job. So I gave it a 6.5 out of 10. I think it's a pretty good card, not amazing. Obviously, its ability is sometimes relevant. Battle Blitz is 0. Clone I gave 7 out of 10. It's not amazing, and it obviously just varies on what you have in your deck and what your opponent has in his deck. But I've rarely had an opportunity where I play a clone and copying the best thing on the battlefield is just not even good for me. Courtly Provocateur. This card is really strange. It's a 3-cost 1/1. Target creature attacks this turn if able. Tap target creature attacks. Tap target creature blocks this turn if able. So its abilities are potentially very impactful. The problem is most of the blue decks don't really benefit too much from these abilities. It's only good when you combine it with a white deck or a green deck, and I've just seen so many times where Courtly Provocateur was just a 3-drop useless spell, and I just really don't think that it's worth it. I gave it a 5.5 out of 10. I've seen it be one of the best cards in a game, MVP of games. I've seen it happen a lot, and I know that it has potential. I just don't like the card that much. What I find really interesting, though, is when it first came out, people were like, this card's terrible, and then some people were advocating for it, saying it's amazing. And I know that people are going to be like, IzDaisho, 5.5? This card should be an 8. But that's probably just because you've won games with it before. I've won games with this card before, too. Does not mean that it is a card that I'm going to take highly in a draft. So it's a 5.5 out of 10. I'd rather take pretty much anything over it, like that I could run in my deck, like the Scroll Thief easily, a Water Courser, whatever. Just not amazing. Divination, drawing 2 cards. So let's bring up something that I heard once, and it made sense. I think Zach Hill was talking about it on a stream. Not sure. Anyway, draw 2 cards, common. So you might think, okay, so this card's an instant 2-for-1. Well, not really, because drawing a land generally isn't a full spell, so it's not a 2-for-1 in the truest sense where you're getting 2 spells for your 1 spell. You're getting a spell and sometimes a land, so it's really like 1.4 or something like that spells for this 1 card. And then since you have to pay 3 mana and basically use your turn, it makes it a decent trade-off. That being said, drawing 2 cards can sometimes be amazing for you, and there's very few times where I'm going to be limited by how many divinations I have. It's more going to be it's never going to be how many do I want to run. It's always going to be how many do I have. That's what I was trying to say. So anyway, I give it 6.5 out of 10. Really like the card, but it's not one of the premier cards. There are definitely a lot of cards that I would take over it. Moving on to the next card, Downpour. Tap up to 3 target creatures. So they've built one of these cards in a bunch since, like, even I've started playing Magic. M12 had Frost Breath, Innistrad had what was that card? Feeling of Dread, Crippling Chill was AVR, and now we have Downpour. And I think Downpour is definitely the worst of those that I just mentioned. Tapping up to 3 target creatures either means it's a worse version of Fog, or it could actually just stop them from blocking, which can sometimes be really useful. So since it's a little bit more versatile than Fog, I gave it a higher rating. You'll see, like, in forever when I ever get around to doing the green one, what Fog gets. But anyway, I've seen this card do well, and that's why I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. It's not completely unplayable. Sometimes it's sideboardable if you need to. It's just an average card, and it's not going to make your main deck 90% of the time, but it's also not terrible to pick one up instead of like a 10-cent rare or whatever. Anyway, Encrust, Enchant, whatever, I'm not going to read it, but you guys should know what Encrust does. If not, you should look it up. Anyway, it's an okay card. I mean, sometimes it's like, oh my god, this card's basically the same thing as Murder. It stops them from using their activated abilities, which is sometimes good, but sometimes you just have to use it on like a Zathrid Gorgon, and then he still has a 3/6 blocker, even though he can't use its ability. So it's a 3/6 Death Touch, rather. It's sometimes really good, sometimes not. It's cute that it stops Staff of Nin also, but I mean, it stops them from pinging with Staff of Nin, but that's pretty, I mean, it's not really the relevant part of Staff of Nin anyway. I don't know why I even mentioned it. I guess it stops Trading Post. Yeah, alright. It stops Trading Post, but they still get to cycle it for a card pretty much. So, yeah, I mean, this card's pretty relevant against creatures a lot of the time. But generally, it'll only deal with creatures that are attacking you rather than creatures that you don't want to be blocking you. So it becomes more like a rebuke, and then it's a sorcery speed rebuke, and it costs 1 blue. So all that being said, I give it a 5.5. I'll run it in my deck, but it's not really going to be my first choice. Then again, it could be contending with a 6 because there are a lot of situations where I would like 1, especially if my deck is light on removal. Anyway, Essence Scatter is pretty much one of the better blue removal spells, I guess. It's one of the only things that sends something to the graveyard in blue. It might be the only thing. Anyway, give it a 6.5. It's really good in some decks. It's really not amazing in other decks, but it could have been a 7. I don't know, whatever. 6.5 Essence Scatter because I like the card, and it does a lot. I mean, just being able to hold up mana for... having to hold up mana is generally a disadvantage, so you don't really want to be doing it, especially since there are very few things that actually cause you to use your mana at instant speed. Like, I mean, there's Jayemdae Tome, but there's a lot of things that do not want you to be using it. Obviously, it helps if you have Archaeomancer, Augur of Bolas, or even like a Talrand or something like that. There's a few cards that actually benefit the more instants and sorceries you have. Spell Twine is another one, but this is actually kind of irrelevant with Spell Twine, so... anyway, that's why I think it's a 6.5. It's good, but it's not always good. But either way, 6.5 is definitely in that range where I really want to play this card pretty much all the time. Fairy Invaders, 4 and a blue for a 3/3 flash flying. This card's awesome. It's pretty much as close as a 2-for-1 in common as you're going to get because you can play it as a 3/3, and it blocks a whole bunch of things. Remember when I was saying how everything is a 2-power flyer? Well, this guy is a 3 toughness flyer. Therefore, he doesn't even trade with most of the things in the format. So it's really good. Just always does its job, and you should pretty much just take this pretty early and almost always run it. I give it a 7.5 out of 10. Speaking of 7.5 out of 10, Fogbank, Defender Flying, prevent all combat damage that will be dealt to Fogbank. I hate this card. It doesn't help you win the game at all. It will never win you a game. But what it does do is gain you an intense amount of life for 2 mana investment. Just imagine a scenario where this guy blocks a 1-power creature every turn for the entire game. And the game goes 8. Then you gained 8 life, and that's never even going to happen. It's always going to be more than that. And you also have to take into account the turns where they don't swing because they only have 1 creature, and Fogbank just stops that. He also just stops Exalted dead in its tracks, completely just neutralizes that entire mechanic. They basically have to use a removal spell on Fogbank. That being said, I'm not willing to give an 8 to a card that doesn't just win you the game. So I give it a 7.5, but this card is one of those cards that you pretty much always want to pick up. If you're trying to build a control deck, if you're trying to build an aggro deck, you could probably still pick one of them up and be fine, just because it gains you so much life throughout the game. So it's a really, really, really good card. I hate it, but it's good. Harbor Serpent, Island Walk, blah, blah, blah. This guy just dominates the blue mirror matchup. Otherwise, he's pretty much useless. I mean, if you're playing the mono blue deck, then maybe you can run him. Well, I mean, you can obviously run him, but generally it's only if they're playing islands also, and in those situations he's incredible. So I did give him a 5 out of 10 because he is main deckable. You don't want to main deck him unless you're really, really heavy blue, but his sideboard potential is so high that I'll actually take it over pretty decent cards, depending on how built my deck is by then. Hydro Surge is terrible, 2 out of 10. Yeah, 2 out of 10. Index is equally as bad, 2 out of 10. Jace Memory Adept, woohoo, we found another 10. This guy just impacts the board. He doesn't impact the board, but he can either draw you cards if you need to do that, if you need to find an answer to whatever they have on board, or he can just win you the game in 2 turns, maybe 3 at the most. Generally, it's going to be 3 turns. So all you have to do is he starts with 4 life. You just have to protect him for 3 turns, and then the game's over. So this card's obviously incredible. You don't need to run Mind Sculpts if you have your Jace Memory Adept. You don't need to run Jace's Phantasms. You can just run this card as your only mill strategy, and it will be glorious, and you will have victory. Speaking of Jace's Phantasm, 1/1 flyer. Oh, yeah, so I gave him a 10 out of 10. It's just one of the best cards in the format. Jace's Phantasm flying. When Jace's Phantasm, it gets +4/+4 as long as they have 10 or more cards in their graveyard. So that's not really going to happen naturally. You're going to have to play bad cards like Mind Sculpt. So I really, really don't like this card. The only time I like this card is when you're playing a really heavy control deck and you have a couple of Vidalcan Entrancers, because Vidalcan Entrancer does get them to 10 cards rather quickly. I mean, it takes 5 turns, but 5 turns in a control deck is not really too many. And then it just gives you an incredible beater until then. Not until then, when you get there. It's also fine if you're running a really heavy Exalted deck, because it becomes a 1/1 a creature that you can play on turn 1 that benefits from Exalted and can actually start getting in really quickly. And if it dies, you really don't care. It also provides late game threat, so then sometimes they have to use removal for it. So it's really not an awful card, but most of the time I don't like to run it. So I gave it... Where are you? Jace's Phantasm. 4.5. I don't know why I just screwed up my order, but I gave it a 4.5 when I rated it, but I really think I think it's more like a 5. So IzDaisho official changing that to a 5. I don't know why I went out of order here on my stupid little list. Anyway, Kraken Hatchling is really okay. It's a 0/4 for 1. Before this format existed, I was like, this card's obviously terrible, I'm never going to run it. But it really does work against the aggressive decks, and sometimes it's what you need if you're trying to build a control deck, which is viable. Blue is pretty much the best color for control, so it's definitely a viable card. I gave it a 5.5 out of 10. Master of the Pearl Trident is terrible. I mean, 2/2s for 2 are already bad. The fact that this one is blue is bad. It's only good if you have about 1 billion Scroll Thieves or 1 billion Augur Bolts. Merfolk of the Pearl Trident is still completely unplayable. Even if you have 4 of these and 4 of each of them, it's just still completely unplayable, and you don't want to have to hit blue on turn 2. So I gave it a 5 out of 10. It's pretty terrible. Merfolk of the Pearl Trident is like a 1? I don't even know if I rated it on this. Oh, I gave it a 2. I'm kind. I put it on the same level with Index and Hydro Surge. Mind Sculpt is one of those cards that I can't really rate because most of the time it's really just not playable. But if you have 5 of them, then you'll probably win most of your games because you'll probably be able to kill your opponent before they kill you. Additionally, if you have Arcane Answers, it can work. The Mind Sculpt deck really wants Fog Banks, just needs some time to get going, and it needs something like Fog Bank to just absorb a ton of life because it has extreme card disadvantage through Mind Sculpts. So definitely not a good card, but it could be the best card in your deck. So there you go. Negate. Let's see. Negate, I gave a 4 out of 10 because it's not really, you don't really want to main deck it. I guess it really should be in the 5 range because cards that are 5 out of 10 are cards that I don't want to main deck, but I will main deck if I have to. So that's pretty much where Negate is. I will main deck this card if I have to. I don't want to. It's a really, really viable sideboard card, so it's definitely not below a 4. So it's okay. You just don't want to have to run it. Anyway, Omniscience is terrible. It's a 0. Redirect is pretty bad. Occasionally you can blow somebody out with it, but you need to know that they're going to have those kind of spells because not all decks run those kind of spells. It doesn't work as well as you'd hope on some spells, like Prey Upon, for instance, which would be a really good one. You would expect to be able to get a blowout, but you may choose new targets for the spell. You can't choose illegal targets, so you still have to choose one creature they control and one creature you control. So it's not really ideal for that, but I mean, it obviously works for Flames of the Firebrand pretty well. But yeah, it's not very good. I gave it a 3 out of 10. It might be a 4, but I just don't like it, and I've never used it to success. Counter target spell, untap 4 lands. Not very good. It's pretty useless, actually. I mean, it's not pretty useless. It's like you can play this deck, a card in a really heavy control deck, but its untap 4 lands ability is almost always useless unless you have a JMD Tome, in which case you can live the dream of rewinding their spell, untapping all your lands, and then using your JMD Tome at the end of the turn, and then just be really happy. Anyway, so Rewind, I did not read you the numbers. I gave it a 4 out of 10. Scroll Thief. This card is a 1/3 whenever it deals combat damage to a player. Draw a card. So this card's awesome. Makes them need to leave their creatures back to block, at least have something back to block, otherwise you just gain insane card advantage. It's also a 1/3 body, which is pretty relevant sometimes, especially against the more aggressive decks. And if you have unsummons, then they need to worry about that, and then they might need to leave 2 creatures back to block because they don't want to get unsummoned and have you draw a card off it, like just say unsummon, return target creature to its owner's hand and draw a card. Like, they just don't want any of this garbage to happen, so that would be really, really bad for them. Anyway, I ended up rating Scroll Thief a 6 out of 10. I think it's good. It's obviously not as good as Arcane Answer or Arctic Haven, but I think it's still a pretty good card and pretty viable. You don't necessarily want to pick up like a billion of them, but if you do, then that makes for a pretty interesting deck as well. Sleep. Tap all creatures target player controls. Those creatures don't untap during the next untap step. So this card is really, it shifts. Like, it's really, really good in some decks. In the decks where you're aggressive and you just want to tap their creatures for 2 turns, then it's awesome. But in the decks where you're losing, then this card only gains you 1 turn, and it's basically a fog. So because of the whole different levels of stuff that it could just be terrible, could just be awesome. I did still give it a 7 out of 10 because of its potential to be one of the better cards. Arcane Answer just makes this card incredible sometimes, but it does cost a bunch of mana to do that. Anyway, Spell Twine is one of my more favorite cards in the set. It's just really, really, really powerful, and the potential to just win the game when you cast this spell is pretty high. And even if you don't win the game, then you're just going to get insane card advantage because you're casting 2 spells, each of which hopefully will give you inherent card advantage. So then you cast 1 spell to basically get 4 cards or 3 cards at the worst. So it's pretty awesome. I really like the card. It doesn't work if they're not playing instants or sorceries, but generally somebody's going to be playing at least 1 or 2. Sphinx of Uthun. This card's really, really, really good. It's one of the better bombs in blue. So if you're building your control deck and you have a Sphinx of Uthun, is a good reason to decide to actually build that control deck. I've rarely seen this card played and then the person who played it lost. It's just it's really just that good. So I gave it an 8.5 out of 10. Stormtide Leviathan is a little bit different. First of all, I mean, it's 1 more mana, which might not seem like so much, but it really is the difference between 7 and 8 mana, because by then you're just top decking lands, so it could be 3 turns difference on average. Yeah, 2.5 turns difference, really. On average, so that could be really, really relevant. Plus the fact that you need 3 islands could be relevant. Plus the fact that generally he works out well, but occasionally he does not. Occasionally, it's just hold on, I actually gotta go. Sorry guys about that little interruption. Anyway, I think I was talking about Stormtide Leviathan. I was saying how he's a little bit more expensive than Sphinx, and that's why I really just don't like it as much. Additionally, he generally wins you the game, but not necessarily. If they have a removal spell for it, then it's pretty much irrelevant, whereas Sphinx, you at least get a couple of cards. And if they have flyers, then they can still just beat you. So, I mean, sometimes it makes a huge difference, and sometimes it really doesn't. So, it's good, but it's not nearly as good as Sphinx of Uthun. So I gave it a 6.5 out of 10 just because it has the potential to win you the game, but and it could be a pretty good thing to stall too, but not always. Anyway, Switcheroo, exchange control of 2 target creatures. It pains me how much worse this card is than Mind Control, and yet it's still pretty relevant. I don't love it, but I definitely think it's a really good card, and you can take it over a lot of stuff. So it's a 7 out of 10. Talron's Sky Summoner, whenever you cast an instant, get a 2/2 flyer, blah blah blah. It's awesome. You can build your deck around him. You can basically just say, you know what? Now I'm actually going to play that 4th Essence Scatter or 6th Divination or whatever. But you can actually take those cards over playable creatures at that point, just because Talron is so good, and if you have a good engine for him, then he's unbelievable. Anyway, I gave him an 8.5 out of 10. And then there's Talron's Vocation, which just gives you 2 Drakes right away, and I rate this card exactly the same, 8.5 out of 10. I mean, it's just been a classic question since the cards came out, Talron's Invocation or Talron, which one's better? And I say neither. They're equally as good. It's obviously, I mean, it's not equal, because if you play Talron on turn 4 and then they kill it, then you get no value out of it, where if you play Invocation on turn 4 and they kill one of your dudes, and you still get some value out of it. So, and your flyers can start attacking right away, where Talron, you're gonna play it, and then you're gonna have to use the instants and sorceries when you need to, and then the flyers don't come out until later. So even if it does produce 3 flyers overall, it might not be better than Talron's Invocation. Tricks of the Trade. A lot of people are probably going to disagree with me on this one, because I know that a lot of players value this card way higher than I do, but it gives you +2/+0 unblockable. So one of the main issues is it doesn't give you plus in the back, so that means that your creatures can still get burned pretty easily. That's one reason why Mark of the Vampire is a lot better than Tricks of the Trade, in my opinion. The value that you get out of this card instantly is pretty high, because you're going to be able to swing it for at least 3, usually more than that. Usually you'll be able to swing it for 4 or 5, or 3 and draw a card or something like that. So in the Scroll Thief deck, Tricks of the Trade's awesome. But other than that, I really don't think it's too good as a win condition. I think I would rather just try to mill them, or like with a Vidalcan Entrancer, than use that. But anyway, I give it a 5.5 out of 10. Unsummon, gotta love Unsummon. Return target creature to its owner's hand, instant speed. It's just very hard to not get a full card's value out of this thing. It's 1 mana instant, and it just does so much. If they like try to kill your Talron, then you can be like, unsummon my Talron, get a dude, and also save my dude. It's just awesome. There's so many applications for it, and it's really really useful. The Vidalcan Entrancer. This card is average at best. I mean, it's a 1/4 for 4, so it's not going to do any it's not going to get any pressure on them. With damage, it can mill them out really slowly. You really have to have a good engine which stops them from dealing damage to you, and then this guy can be your win condition. I've seen decks like that. You don't really want to run this in multiples, because then if you have to tie up 2 mana every turn, then you can't really use your mana for other stuff, which can sometimes be an impediment. And yeah, so I gave him a 5.5 out of 10, just because sometimes he can be useful, but generally you don't really want to be playing this guy. Voidstalker. I like Voidstalker. I mean, it's a 2/1 for 2, and so if you play it on time, then it can be extremely relevant. It can get in for 2 or 4 damage or something like that. And then later on in the game, it's a removal spell, so it never becomes irrelevant. The worst is obviously when you swing in for 2 on turn 2, and then they like Flames of the Firebrand, kill this, and something else or whatever, and that's just a sad day for you. Watercourser. 3-drop, 2/3 gets bigger. I like it. I mean, it trades with everything. It walls off bears. It swings in for 4 damage, and it's hard to block. It's just a really versatile creature, so I'll give it a 6.5 out of 10. And then there's Welkin and Windrake. These cards are so similar. They're always in the same pack together. This guy blocks a little better, but not really that much. And then this guy attacks a little better because he comes out a turn earlier. I like the attacking a little bit better, so I'm going to give this is 7 and this is 6.5. I originally had them both the same, but I really think that Welkin is just one step above Windrake. Pretty much, I mean, not every time. Occasionally, if I'm not building an aggressive deck, then I'll want a Windrake more, but I usually take the Welkin over the Windrake. So that's going to be it for blue. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and have a wonderful day. Bye.